own experiences, people will always construct norms in this regard. The problem we identify on our side of the house is that the norms that currently exist and the pressures that exist on women overwhelmingly push them into having children and push them into a decision that ultimately ends up hurting them and ultimately ends up resulting in a deeply sexist world. On our side of the house, we see our job as to provide women with all the messaging that we can to try to balance out that scale, to attempt to provide multiple counteracting messages around a woman, because we think in a world in which there are multiple competing messages working on you, you have the best ability and freedom to determine between them, to decide which ones of those are more convincing, and to ultimately make a decision that has an impression of looking more free, and we think it's a decision that ultimately ends up helping work. Firstly, in terms of the model, we don't intend for the policies we introduce to have an enormously practically coercive element to them, like directly, monetarily penalising women who do have children, but rather our vision, we envision something much more along the lines of social messaging or encouragement. That means that feminist organisations as well as governments, we would encourage to steer women away from having children as much as they can in the messaging that they put out. We would encourage people like doctors to emphasise the harms and the dangers of having children, rather than, as they do in many countries, actively encourage women to work towards childbirth. On the side of the house, we think that kind of messaging can be really powerful.
There currently exists a strong set of incentives in the form of things like child benefit that are almost universal to have children. Would you remove these incentives?
Yes, we would actually. To the extent that there are already coercive, monetary elements that say that women are only going to be able to get by if they do have children, that women are going to be actively pushed into having children by virtue of these things, we would remove them. We think a world in which there are more narratives and less of those directly coercive things is one in which women are more free. 2 points I'm going to bring again. Firstly, I'm going to describe what the currently existing norms are that pressure women to have children, why they're overwhelmingly in favour of having children, and why we see that it's important to have a counteracting narrative to that. Well, secondly, looking more practically at what the effects of having children are on women, why they're often extremely harmful to them, and why we think we make the world a better place for women when we encourage them away from that decision. Firstly, let's talk about the norms that exist to have children. We think they exist in 3 main areas. Firstly, we think there is a gendered expectation that exists on women that claims that somehow because of their biology or somehow because of their association with children has existed throughout history, that women cannot be complete, they cannot be whole, they cannot stand as equals in face of their mothers or in face of other people around them until they have given birth to children, that somehow the process of childbirth must transform you into a complete human being, and we think that's an incredibly problematic process for people to experience. We think there are a number of different things you can invest yourself into in your life which can give you an incredible amount of meaning and an incredible amount of purpose. But the unusual focus that society places on children, particularly for women to proceed with childbirth and have them, is something that we think is particularly harmful. The second way in which these norms manifest is in the political motives. Overwhelmingly, governments around the world tend to actively encourage women to have children and tend to focus those messages onto women to have children in order to advocate for particular incentives based on population. One perhaps exception to that rule might be China, though they've recently lifted their one-child policy and are now investigating measures to actively encourage women to have 2 children or even more based on their own political incentives. But we say in a lot of other countries there are essentially population races that occur when certain individuals perceive other members of the population as not having enough, as being a danger to them if they will come to outnumber them. This is a huge issue in countries where populations are closely balanced. For instance, in Lebanon, where for decades people from various ethnic groups have been actively pressuring women to have children on the basis that they do not wish to be outnumbered by other groups. It's also a huge issue in relations between Palestine and Israel, where each of those groups has encouraged people actively to have children in order to make sure that they don't sort of lose out on what they perceive as a war of demographics. The third reason in which these pressures exist is that there's a pressure to cede to the desires of husbands when you exist in a marital unit, and often those husbands, because they don't tend to bear the brunt of work in child caring, as I'm going to talk about more soon, have a tendency to be tempted by children and the idea of having children without that husband properly considering the full burden of that child, because that full burden does not lie upon them, which means a lot of the time husbands pressure women to have children within that marital relationship, and women are actively encouraged to cede to the pressure of that husband, otherwise they're criticised for not being a good wife. Let's then secondly talk about what the effects of this policy are likely to be. We have 4 of them. The first is we think that children, in terms of the amount of work and effort that has to be put into them to raise them, overwhelmingly that burden tends to fall on women, and it means that they get shackled down with children in a way that is deeply problematic. Part of this is due to cultural norms that I've already kind of covered in terms of the expectations that exist on women, but these are backed up by practical considerations. In a world where a woman's wages are lower, in a world in which there is often very little paternity leave or ability for men to access those sorts of things, in a world in which there are sort of biological aspects like breastfeeding which are used to justify the various cultural norms that pressure women to work and raise children, women tend to be burdened with all of a huge majority of the care for children and tend to be shackled to them for the next 18 years in terms of exerting an enormous amount of work on them, which prevents them from pursuing pretty much any other meaningful aspect of things that they have to do within their lives. Secondly, we think that women tend to take a much greater share of the financial burden of children, particularly in a world in which divorces occur or separations occur. There is a sense in which single mothers, often without access to the same kind of lawyers that a better paid man has access to, often without proper child support in worlds in which those are often discouraged and which women are blamed for the divorce, often those people end up with a great level of financial burden for their child, which is very problematic. Thirdly, we think there are devastating effects on a woman's career at the point in time in which she leaves before pregnancy and is often perceived as being an effective worker at the point in time in which she returns. Around the world, there has been significant progress in the wages of women when they first enter job workforces when they are young, but that stagnates and an enormous gap forms at the point in time in which families begin to have children. We want to encourage women not to give in to the pressures that force them away from career success. We like the idea that there will be role models of women succeeding in business, and at the point in time in which we can encourage women away from children, we can save them from that. The final practical thing we think we managed to accomplish is that we don't burden children with multiple childbirths and pregnancy. And these kind of issues of pregnancy continue long after them in the form of postnatal depression, in the form of body image issues. But I would say it even gets worse. There are many parts of this world where the most dangerous thing a woman can do is to give birth to a child. Childbirth kills women, and at the point in time in which women are being pressured into having children and into having pregnancy despite the fact that it risks their lives, we say on this side of the house we are very proud to stand for any kind of government, any kind of organisation that encourages women to consider not to take that risk.
Okay, thank you to the Prime Minister. We call on the Leader of the Opposition to introduce the cash.
3 points from our side. Firstly, why we think having a child is a very meaningful part of many people's lives, not a decision that people should get involved in. Secondly, how it makes people more altruistic for societies and more willing to look towards the long term. Second point, we're going to say that we think sharp drop-offs in population are a bad thing that should be actively guarded against. Thirdly, we're going to talk about how true empowerment of women doesn't come from making them conform to look like men, but rather to respect the biological differences of having a child and what that entails, and we get more support for that. First point of context. One, it's not exactly clear what the problem is that they're pointing to that isn't going away. So with development, we have seen empirically around the world that population rates have decreased. Empirically, we see with all developing economies that the more developed they come, the fewer children they have. But we've seen, particularly in the developed world, that population rates are already falling below replacement rates. So we'll point you to Japan, which is already significantly below the 2.1 replacement rate. Britain and the rest of Europe have some countries already below that rate, but most are tending towards it. I think you're on our side. But furthermore, I haven't gotten into anything meaty yet. So ultimately, what is this policy about? One, we think it's noteworthy that they take the hard line in terms of fighting the notion of support and removing it. But one, we will note that that is a massive harm to the women that are already out there. So when they say there are many women who currently don't have support from their husbands and don't have financial backing, the point at which the state no longer supports those people, those who are still going to have children are significantly screwed over. But furthermore, we'll say it's unlikely that everyone stops having children, particularly the most marginalized are likely to still continue. So if they are hugely pressured to have children, we think it's important that the state is there to support them and they remove this. Finally, it's worth noting that we think who this is actively discouraging is the marginal woman. So there already is an increasing trend of women not having children. What this is actively switching is people who would have had children who you now pull to the other side with that. Okay, a couple of direct pieces of responsiveness, the rest will be integrated. One, he says there's significant norms to have children. My first clash is that I'm unclear why we have to be supportive of these norms, and why actively discouraging children, people having children, is necessary to combat them. So he points to Israel and Lebanon actively encouraging people to race against each other, assuming we have the political capital to actively discourage people from having children. I think we'd rather implement that capital in having a neutral approach from government of not actively encouraging people. But furthermore, we would say that many of the norms around a birth crash for women can be accommodated. Sure, we think as the feminist movement it's not nice. We can still advocate against women being pressured into having children without actively pressuring them into not having children. That doesn't seem in line with this policy. But furthermore, we would say that a lot of this case shots this at the point at which he says, look, there's a huge economic cost. Birth is a huge cost in terms of a huge potential cost to these women. And he says that there are many pressures on women and lack of support for them. We would say those are significant coercive factors in the other direction. Why is this different? Well, we would say a state-led propaganda campaign does infringe upon those norms. At the moment, we have norms for and against. You are actively seeking to move against that choice in a very proactive way that we think is damaging. With that, let's move on to the first point of positive matter. The rest will be integrated. No, thank you. Firstly, we would say that having a choice about a child is often a very meaningful choice for people to have, and one that we should respect as the state. Why is this the case? Well, we would say empirically that a vast number of mothers around the world report that having children was the single most important and fulfilling choice within their lives. They say that they get a huge amount of pleasure from it, and they are willing and glad to have overcome the pain of birth in order to get that recompense. We would say there's a huge individual benefit there that we think is hugely great to these people. They say, well, there's norms for and against. We would say that, as I've already highlighted, what they actively do is they lead a state-led propaganda campaign that aims to make people override their own intuitions on this matter in order to change it. Second part here is that we would say that having children often makes people better for society. For one, it makes you more long-termist. We think you're far more likely to care about the long term and the environment at the point at which you know that your child is going to live through it. We also think that you're far more likely to care about your society and your community at large, because you know that your children are ultimately going to have to grow up in that society and live alongside with them. So we think it makes you more long-termist, but also more pro-building that active community. At the point at which you care for your child, it extends that empathy to creating a stable society that we think is particularly altruistic in a beneficial way. No thank you. Second point, why we think there's a serious problem with drop-offs in population. Look, the developed world is currently already below the replacement rate, as I highlighted in my intro. What happens now when you actively discourage people is you get sharp drop-offs in population. So Japan is at the moment trying to actively encourage people. If they reverse that policy, where you already have a decreasing trend in the number of birth rates, what you get is a sudden decline in population. What's the harms in this? Well, it means that you've now got a small working population having supported a vast overage population. You have huge fiscal problems that occur in terms of deficits, and you also don't have a capacity to provide for those elders within society at the point at which your workforce doesn't match those who are older than you. Whether you would say is perhaps you can just let in immigrants, we'd say historically this hasn't worked, but particularly when this is a global phenomenon, you don't have enough people to let in. But we'd say that ultimate response is you still have the hostile forces against letting in foreigners. It means that these countries, even when they have decreasing populations, face that drop-off and face those fiscal deficits and ultimately crash. We'd say often when the harm becomes so great, it's already too late. You have that massively skewed workforce. So I'll take closing.
The norm that encourages women to have children also forces them into marriages where they are subjugated. Are you more or less able to leave a partner when you also have a child with him?
Well, look, I think you're more able to leave that partner when you have active state support that can help you independently of that partner. Secondly, look, all of these things we can still advocate against manipulative partners. You don't have to actively not have that child. Well, wherefore is actively encouraging that support for children and independence of women that you think to get more. But that brings me nicely onto the next point. We would say in order to get true empowerment for women, you don't just push them to act like men, but you get the respect for the biological differences that come when you are biologically capable of giving birth. So what are these issues? We think breastfeeding in public, more maternity leave. We think damage or postnatal depression, all issues that are seriously under-advocated for in our current society. Well, we would say those advocacies become inherently more powerful when you have more mothers. What this policy encourages companies and governments to do is to ignore the problem. The point at which it's very few people having babies in your workplace, you don't have to deal with that issue. Why is this damaging? Because we would say that often the most marginalized and most vulnerable women are those who don't have that advocacy, who don't have that protection. So it's particularly good for powerful and influential women who are most likely to be persuaded by his narrative to have empathy for those issues and be willing to advocate for them as well. In that way, we get more attention for them, more empathy for them, more community discourse around them that we think ultimately leads to policy shift and companies changing their internal policies. For these reasons, we get more empowerment and more support. We are very proud to oppose this motion.
Thank you to the Leader of the Opposition. We call on the Deputy Prime Minister.
The problem with OO's case is that they missed the entire first piece of context that Pat gave you, which was to say that if you stand on OO, you support the status quo, that right? That also means that you have to support the current norms that pressure women into having children every single day, that tell them that childbirth and pregnancy is magical and there will be a process they will treasure for the rest of their life. That means, as Pat told you and was ignored by that LO speech, you need a countervailing norm that pushes back against those norms, that tells women it is okay if they do not want to have children. It is okay if the first 6 months of having a baby was pure hell and they wish they never did that. That meant that it comforted women all around the world who felt awful about who they were as a woman because they thought that it made them less of one. I'm going to do a couple of things in this speech. First, let's deal with the rebuttal they gave us on our material. Then I'll tell you something about why it's meaningful or altruistic and about job and population. Then I got to the substantive as well. Firstly, let's go through the responses they told us. The first thing they said was, well, it makes women feel really bad, the women who want to have children now, but now the government is telling them that it is bad. Obviously that is untrue for the reason that a lot of women consciously want to have children and enjoy the process of motherhood. The problem here is that too many women are pushed into it. A lot of women grow up knowing they will really enjoy motherhood and enjoy having a baby or going through pregnancy, but now it means that when this norm is pursued, they are much more likely to question their motives and wonder if it is a result of the patriarchy or their own values or wants, and that means they are much more likely to make a better and more informed decision. It does not make women feel bad because obviously other norms still exist that tell them that it is good to be a mother or it is magical to be a mother. The second thing they told us was, well, now you get no benefits and support for your children. Let's be really clear here. Obviously, if you are a mother and you have a child and you need welfare, both you and your child will still qualify for things like welfare because it is two beings under the eyes of the government. The point is you do not get things like baby bonuses or child bonuses that are specifically for children. They do not lose all government services ever. Instead, they are being recommended to do certain things, but they also get some support. The third thing to note here is they're all like, well, you don't change the norms because people still have children. That is the point. We do not want children to actually stop. We want women to question the reasons and the motives in which they have to actually have children, and we want them to feel empowered in that. The fourth thing was, well, no thank you. They were like, well, why can't the government be neutral and just not care about whether or not women have children? This obviously ignores all the material that Pat gave me, which I told you in my introduction, which is to say that other pressures already exist, which means that you need to have a countervailing force by a government that people support. They ignored a lot of Pat's material about how the load of motherhood always falls on a female in a relationship, about how it hurts their career and it means there are no longer female role models in high industries, about how it hurts marriage and how it hurts happiness, about how pregnancy family that are their nieces and nephews, or even if that is not true, they also care about their friends or their family that live around them. But secondly, even if that were not true, people that are altruistic and long-termers because of their children are often only doing that because of their specific children, which is to say that they are long-termers and they set up, I don't know, a huge amount of inheritance for their children to inherit. But it does not mean that every single parent will want to change the world because of their child. Ultimately, that never actually changes, and that is why it is bad. Actually, probably would change the amount of inheritance people get to inherit because there'd be less children, which is probably good. Then they were like, well, there'd be a huge children population, which is really bad, because there'd be young people that could not support all the old people. Obviously, that is a change that we are willing to support. No, thank you. We will just include better benefits for the elderly because it is a changing demographic that we have to adjust to with welfare, which we're very happy to do. Then they were like, question? No, thank you. So let's move on to my material. The first thing I'm going to talk about is why it is ultimately wrong to bring children into the world, and often why children are particularly awful. Firstly, coincidentally, I think it is very interesting that we live in a particularly fucking awful world, which means that bringing a child into it is bad, and therefore women should not necessarily feel inclined to do it if the children will not always be prosperous. Why is that?
Point of information.
Yeah, sure.
Is this not entirely in tension with your claim that you still respect the rights of women to have children? It's not a morally poor choice.
No, because we're saying women can continue to have children. The point is, if it decreases by like a quarter, then that is better for the world, because the problem is overpopulation. It is not intention. We are saying some women deeply do not enjoy childhood or motherhood, and therefore they should be not forced into it. Please listen next time. So, why is it bad for people that want to bring children into the world? Obviously, there are things like overpopulation, or inevitably there is deeply entrenched inequality and poverty. That is especially true in places in the developing world that result in things like slums or deep unemployment. That means that it is very likely, on a probability basis, that children will not prosper or be necessarily happy in the world because of the way that poverty and inequality is eventuating. It is actually cruel to bring children into that world. What does it mean specifically for the developing world and for developing countries? Because I think especially when you discourage people from having children, you also encourage other things. For example, it increases more of a push to encourage things like contraception, to discourage unwanted children, or to discourage things like, coincidentally, that also helps with STIs, but it also means you're more likely to promote things like safe abortions or safe births in those countries because you are trying to actively discourage people from having children, which obviously means if people are still having sex, they have to use contraception somehow. That is obviously just coincidentally good for the developing world. The other thing, obviously, as to why it is cool to bring a child into the world is climate change is happening, and that means that even though children may not be alive at the point at which the world actually explodes, they still bear the brunt of that, and they have to experience natural disaster after natural disaster. Finally, children are particularly awful, in my final substantive point, and treat their parents like absolute shit. Why do women often bear the brunt of that? Two reasons. The first is often women and mothers are viewed as the emotional parent in a heterosexual relationship, which means that they are the ones who try to reach out to their teenage child and talk to them about their emotions, which means they face the most outbursts and backlash and feel as though they are not wanted after raising their child for 18 years. The second reason is because as a result of like the pay gap and expectations, they are mostly the ones who live at home with their children or look after their children the most, which means that they bear the brunt of emotional abuse that their children throw at them during their teenager or young adult phase. So, for the reasons that it is awful for a lot of women to have to enter into childhood, but it still encourages women who actually want to be mothers and actually want to have children, we were so proud to propose this motion.
Okay, thank you to the Deputy Prime Minister. We call on the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
I think the problem with the opening government case is that they put pressure on women to move away from the patriarchal symptom without addressing the causes of patriarchy. So in the same way that you can see in the workforce that women often earn less than men, so they have unequal power, they might be treated badly, that's not a reason to encourage women to not be in the workforce. That's a reason to address the power dynamics at play, to give women more power in doing the thing that is fundamentally meaningful. That's why Desmond's analysis about why it's fundamentally valuable and meaningful to have a child is important. If that's true, that means that the way that we should be addressing the issues of inequality in childbearing is by facilitating the ability to make that choice freely, not actively encouraging people from making that choice. What's this debate about? Look,
choice that is most meaningful for them. We can try to unpick ways in which there are undue pressures on women to have children where that isn't what they want, but they have to say, don't have children, it's a bad idea. And like, I mean, I could do more on this, but I assume that CAs know what motions they say. Okay, so what that means is that the narratives that we on the comparative are allowed to push, given they have political capital to transform the narratives that exist in society, we can have the political capital to push other narratives that aren't putting pressure on women to make a different decision. Why does this matter? Critically, the mechanism that they point to is directing pressure to women when the problem that they identify is patriarchal pressures put on women. What's the net effect of this? More pressures on women rather than addressing the underlying causes by disempowering the patriarchal narratives on their side. So how would you do that? Probably by doing things like making it easier for women to take longer maternity, forcing men to also take paternity leave, allowing women to earn more so that they have more household bargaining power. None of those things are mutually exclusive with allowing women to have children and saying that it's okay to have children if you want to do so. Okay, then a second thing about the problem that they've identified is that they've asserted that there's this huge pressure to have children. We don't actually think that's true empirically if you look at the world in which we exist, where we do see declining birth rates and more women choosing to not have children. So we think that for the people who are choosing to have children, especially in the developed world, it's most likely a choice that those women find to be valuable. In the developed countries that we talk about, often the incentives to have children are so great that this kind of narrative pressure or like changing government support isn't going to make a difference. Why? Because in a lot of developing countries, they already don't get very much government support. And the reason they have children is so that they have someone to support them in old age, because they don't have state security in that way. So that benefit doesn't change on their side. There's still that financial incentive. So what happens with these kinds of narratives? These kind of narratives, especially when pushed onto poor people, say you're a bad person, you're living an unfulfilling life, and you're going to get less state support as a result. The consequence is incredibly harmful for those people. Critically, what we say is important to understand is that when they're advocating for more pressure, but they haven't changed how empowered women are, which none of their analysis says that they will, given that there will still be patriarchal dynamics, you just won't have a child in that dynamic, you still see women being treated very badly because now it becomes in the patriarch's interest to pressure women to not have children. We've seen how that played out in China. How does it play out? Forced abortions because the child is now a burden or a cost. It's pressurizing the woman to make sure if they do have one child that it's a boy, so more abandonment of female child. When you instrumentalize women with an external pressure, which is exactly what their policy is, that doesn't improve the position of women. It just means women get used in different ways. We think those ways are still going to be harmful on their side. Critically, what we want to do in our case is facilitate the choice for women who want to have these children. The evidence analysis shows you that it can be socially valuable and personally valuable. So now I'm going to talk about that and why we have achieved those gains. Firstly, let's talk about the value of having children, then I'm going to talk about empowerment. I want to flag with you the empowerment discussion that Desmond had about how you get the best kind of collectivization and advocacy happens on our side, and they never responded to that. No, I'll take you guys later. So what's the value to having children? And here I think a lot of our stuff just hasn't been touched. The idea that you have a special bond they concede to when they say you're more likely to give inheritance to your children. If there's a problem with inheritance, we can do inheritance regulations. That's not what this debate's about. The special bond that you have is one that is deeply ingrained and one of the few ways that very many people are able to get fundamental meaning from life. It's also a very secure family relationship that we think can be incredibly valuable, especially for women who on average have strong skills at being nurturing and experiencing love. We think that it's an area where they can experience particular meaning in their lives, and we think undermining that is really bad. What are the harms we get? There's certain overpopulation as a problem. Look, population growth is slowing all over the world except for sub-Saharan Africa, and we think to implement this policy in sub-Saharan Africa comes hand in hand with forcing families to have less support in old age, often pushing those people deeper into poverty. That's a major harm that they need to deal with on their side. We think that encouraging development in sub-Saharan Africa is the best way to slow overpopulation there, and that's something that doesn't have to come with the kind of narratives that say that you shouldn't have children. Rather, it's something that people opt for naturally when you encourage development. I'll take closing now.
People are less likely to care about the hardships of motherhood when it is seen as something ultimately enjoyable. How do we get the political capital to improve motherhood without publicising its pitfalls?
Great. When you have more mothers going through motherhood, there's far more publicity because it's more visible, because it's more likely that people talk about it, and explicitly for the mechanism that Desmond talks about, where he says the woman with more political capital, who experience the least pressures in having motherhood and often do it most freely, are the ones who are most likely to be able to pioneer this advocacy by writing articles, by demanding and funding NGOs that fund postnatal depression awareness. All of those changes happen better on our side. Okay, so then we think in terms of overpopulation, you don't get the harms that they talk about. Then they say the world's a terrible place. Objectively, the world is the best to live in that it's ever been. going down, poverty is going down, there's less conflict in the world. You might find it bad because of your Twitter bubbles, but that's not the reality of the world we're actually in. That was a bad argument. We also spoke about specifically why the steep drop-off in the ability to raise funds to fund a welfare state and support people in their old age is incredibly harmful and results in tensions and inability for people to live good lives. Their responses will increase welfare spending. That's the point. You can't, because you have fewer people in your state who are working and earning money and producing, and that means you have a smaller tax base, less money to fund people who are elderly and desperately in need of support, and less money to redistribute to the poorest. All of those are major harms in terms of the society that you create, and it's real problems that we're struggling with at the moment. Okay, how do we get greater empowerment on our side? Given that we've shown you that this is a valuable choice that is both individually and socially valuable, what we tell you is that you get greater awareness and advocacy for this meaningful choice where you don't force people out of the choice that they want to make. Why is this the case? You have greater collectivization when more people do something. You have greater medical learning if more people are going through pregnancy. One of the major problems with female healthcare in the past is that women weren't patient enough, and that meant that the way we treated women was worse. If more women go through pregnancy, doctors just learn more. When you have more women, you have greater collectivization, advocacy, money going into these problems, and you're better able to address the parts of pregnancy that are hard for women, making women overall better off, and especially the most vulnerable women. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and the Member of Government.
The opening half of this debate goes thus. Opening opposition says, there are some benefits to having kids, perhaps you feel fulfilled. Opening government says, there are some harms, perhaps you feel burdened. What we're going to tell you at closing government is that you can have both. And the way to achieve the kinds of fulfillment from people who have kids is to destigmatize the discussion around all of those harms, to provide women the resources and the social space to discuss things like postnatal depression, not feeling like you love your kid, feeling like you want an escape from it. And the only way to grant that space is by a policy that initially actively disincentivizes it and discusses all of the harms that result from it. So, for the women who still choose to have kids, they get the benefits of opening opposition, but only at closing government do they also enjoy the freedoms that opening government wanted. 2 points in extension, but both will be integrated. The first is why this helps women who still have kids, and the second is why this policy would be effective, providing you the mechanisms that were lacking from the opening government case. So, the first thing to note under this first point of extension is obviously many women still have children for the reasons that opening opposition provides. So, many norms that coerce you into that, so that will still exist. How does this policy help? That is in 3 ways. The first and very simply is that it encourages women to just have less kids, so you do not need total effectiveness for this to happen, and that you feel empowered to understand the harms that come from your first child, and feel like you don't need to create things like a family structure or give them a brother or sister to play with as a result of this policy. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, this reshifts the ways that children are raised, and that's in a number of very crucial ways. The first is that you encourage, having children encourages you to also take on an obligation to look after them. And those are narratives that are intimately intertwined and not extricable as opening opposition would have you believe, because the belief that you should have children is, or the gendered expectations mean you then to look after it, and a deconstruction of the norm that you should have children also follows the deconstruction of the second. But secondly, the idea that women should not have kids means that those who then choose to require some level of male buy-in that doesn't exist currently, because the expectation is that currently women who have kids want it of their own, and the norm from the state that says that is not something you should want, you should not have kids, that should be discouraged, means that partners who then choose to require support from that other partner initially, because they would have to because they have to be talked around from all of this state messaging. Thirdly, it encourages more discussion around children initially. And this is somewhat similar to that previous reason, right? But if you think about it, there is currently very limited discussion around how that child will be raised or how that life will function, because it is accepted as a norm that women will have children. The way to counter that is to challenge that norm at its inception, and to say that it is not necessary for that woman to have it, which means that when you are discussing that child, all of this state advertising says things like, hey, it is true I will be able to work much less. It is true I will suffer lots of, mental problems. It is true I will feel lonely in many instances. And the only way to counter that is to give a discussion beforehand in order to change it. Fourthly, there is currently a focus on the baby rather than the mother, because when people come and talk to women after they've had kids, they never ask things like, are you sleeping alright? Are you not doing okay? And they focus on the baby itself. This recenters a discussion based on this advertising, saying things like, are you feeling like you're settling back in? And discussing those things. What are the benefits of that? That's what I tell you in my introduction, that this brings you the harm, that this removes the harms of childbirth that opening government gives you, even if this policy is not effective in the way they describe, and you get the benefits that opening opposition gives you. The second, or possibly third reason why this helps women is to our kids, that it allows recognition and support of those problems. That is the narrative currently that's attached to motherhood, is that it should be completely celebrated and is beautiful and life-fulfilling and all of those things. We think that there are incredible problems that I described. Things like postnatal depression, things like needing trauma therapy after childbirth, things like feeling like you don't love your kid all the time, that they are a shit some of the time, and that is okay for women to feel, but the narrative as it is currently that motherhood is beautiful silences women when discussing those harms. This addresses it, because now you are finally discussed and given a space to do it, and it carves out a norm of acceptability through this government policy that cannot exist otherwise, and a recognition about how unfair upon women this is. What does opening opposition kind of say of this? They give you two things. The first is, well, we'll just do the perfect balance of policy, and our messaging will be, you should just make free choices. I know that doesn't make much sense, and it's somewhat intuitive, because when you think about it, that just doesn't exist. Advertising against things like binge drinking, labels on bottles don't say, there are some benefits to alcohol, there are some harms. Maybe you should drink this, it might make you worse, but you'll have a better night. All of it has to say that this will make you more likely to die in a car crash. This will destroy your brain, and those are the only effective forms of changing it. But secondly, you cannot create mutual pressure, because fundamentally pressure changes one way or the other, and the belief that you should have a free choice is informed by existing social narratives around how that free choice should be exercised, which is the reason you need to counter that, and their attempt does not stand up. Secondly, they say, well, now you just have more mothers, and more mothers means there's more discussion and more power to try and improve mothership. I think the mechanism there of woman power doesn't work. We have had billions of mothers over time, and they have not been effective at changing the way things happen. And the reason is because it is too stigmatized to discuss the harms that you would want to change, for the reasons that I previously described, that you cannot talk sensibly to many people who are ashamed for doing so when you talk about why you are not enjoying that motherhood. The only way to carve out that space is via this policy. I'll take closing if they have one. Opening.
Why couldn't all of this be achieved with the narrative that said that mothering is challenging but good, that focused on raising awareness for postnatal depression directly as opposed to this method?
For all the reasons I gave you about why you cannot have a neutral narrative, and also if you think about it, all of the if your policy is, we will have a policy that says motherhood has all of these incredibly bad harms and you should consider them. That sounds like an active deterrent to me, and it sounds like they're siding with government if their policy is you will get postnatally depressed, you will not feel attached to your child, and you will be out of work. That is an active discouragement of it, and you cannot believe that they can support that in this debate. So, second point of extension, why will this be effective? Opening government says there are all these countervailing norms that are coercive, and there are lots of harms to motherhood. What we're providing in extension is the way that this policy overcomes those norms, which is not proven in their case. The first thing is that this destigmatizes the discussions of motherhood. So this is some of the analysis I've given you. That women have networks of women, and carving out a space in which they can discuss all the harms of that policy allow a social interaction from this, not relying on the powers of the state, by making that a socially acceptable form of discussion. Women in discussing those who already have kids now feel acceptable to discuss those other harms. Secondly, you have a sticking point against existing social coercion. Being able to say to your boss who doesn't want you to have kids or a person in your family now gives you a point that the government is on your side in that discussion and gives you power against it. Thirdly, governments have very strong signalling mechanisms that they come from sources of historically, high power, that they have respect for many people, that historically strong campaigns are built on that. But fourthly, this can come in the form of empowerment that opening opposition wanted, that saying you should be free in making those decisions, and that there are harms that you would face otherwise, and that, the reason you should not have kids is you would have all of this extra free time. This doesn't need to be one of shame for women. We are very proud to propose.
feminist movement has a massive image problem. To that end, I don't think they should pursue a policy that alienates women, alienates men, and actually makes the women they represent poorer. 3 extensions from closing opposition. First, this makes women materially worse off. I appreciate opening opposition, hand wave, and flag argument. We're going to give you why that actually entrenches exactly the sorts of things closing government talk about. For example, women being bound to men. Second of all, talk about how women actually get less support from the feminist movement in directly engaging with the closing government extension. Third, how the feminist movement is destroyed in the eyes of men. Before that, though, I want to do a couple of extraneous bits to rebuttal. The rest is going to be integrated. A couple of weird claims coming out of closing government primarily. For example, the fact that there is a focus on the baby itself that currently ignores women's mental health. I just think this doesn't actually factually align with the way that pregnancy works, the way that the feminist movement is currently gaining immense amounts of traction on issues like women's health. And the reason we're having this discussion is because we've all heard it, but this is something that's being directly frontlined by the feminist movement. The claim that people just ask about the kids is factually incorrect. Second of all, when we talk about individuals having fewer kids, I want to point out that there's literally not one word of actual analysis, apart from the generic hand-waving of the Gov case as to why this is true. Specifically because they say, oh, women should not have children in the first place, not that those that should choose to have children should choose to have fewer on them. There is genuinely no mechanism provided. If anything, I think it means that women are less likely to listen to the feminist movement when they say you should perhaps have fewer children, or you should have smaller families, because they have alienated them in the first place. 3 extensions. First, materially worse off. Second, less support for women. Third, less support for men. Before that, though, I want to ask who actually listens to the feminist movement and who actually changes their behavior as a result of this. The only analysis we get from Gov proving this policy actually works is, no joke, from 6:15 onwards in the closing government extension. If you want to add to that in the whip, fine, I just don't think you should stand it around. Why do the majority of poor women in particular not listen to this? 4 reasons. First, in the developing world, for instance, there is a very, very weak feminist movement that doesn't have a lot of traction in the eyes of many women. It's perceived as extreme. Second, there are very fiscal, economic benefits to women to pursuing having children, providing people in their old age, or providing for them in the short term in terms of working in the short term. Third, we have cultural norms like filial piety, or those of large families, or those of religion that explicitly say, and many women believe, it is their role to raise children. Fourth, and by their own claim, sometimes it's men making the choice for women as to whether or not they have kids. So the likelihood of these men listening to the feminist movement is pretty low. What all of this means is that they, and they can see this, do not change the way that many women think, because this isn't a message they'll interact with, it isn't a message that will resonate with them, it isn't a message that they will genuinely believe to be true. Consequences of that. 1. Women are materially worse off as a result of this policy. You strip women of child benefits and of postnatal support, you make them poorer for exercising a basic bodily choice to have children. 4 impacts of this that opening opposition don't give you. First, I think it's principally abhorrent. The logic here is that women actually deserve to be compensated for having children, specifically because they're providing the state with a service. They're providing them with their workforce, they're providing them with their intellect, they're providing them with their tax base. The idea that you shouldn't compensate a woman for the immense bodily and physical trauma she undergoes for 9 months as a borderline slave to that child, by your own logic, the argument that you shouldn't financially compensate that is absurd. Second of all, I think this means that lots of women struggle to raise their children. Raising children is very, very expensive. You have to pay for extra medical care for yourself. You might have to buy them things like trams or whatever. You might have to pay for their schooling. What all this means is that if you strip the overwhelming majority of women with very basic access to financial services, they're going to actually struggle to raise those children. Third, I think you ironically need people more dependent upon a partner. That is to say, that if I'm no longer receiving financial benefit from the state from raising children, that is the point at which I am genuinely more likely to stay in an abusive relationship, because it's the only way I can afford to finance the raising of that child. Fourth, on free choice, I think at the point at which you make it much, much harder for women to have children by financial imposition upon them, that is the point at which they cannot claim to represent the feminist movement, they cannot genuinely claim to provide women with choice. Second of all, why do less women access support from the feminist movement as a result of this policy? Direct engagement with the closing government extension. I'm rebutting it right now. The feminist movement, as it stands, does not take a direct stance on motherhood. The difference here is they're saying that, and by the logic of the second DPM speech, so that's not a knife in the closing gov, like have fun with that motherhood is a morally awful thing to do. What does this mean? It means that it's not going to be the case you have more discussions around women's health or post-marital depression, because women don't feel confident showing up to feminist meetings if they are a mother, because they have you've literally created by the gov case in OG a narrative that says and explicitly televised this, that women that choose to have children are betraying other women, that they're giving into the pressure that men voice upon them. What that means is that women are less likely to talk to other women about their experiences. They're less likely to seek solace in the companionship of other women. They're less likely to go to feminist meetings. What all this means is, in a context where Gov set out that men are really shit at helping women through pregnancy, that is the point at which women get less support because they perceive other women as ostracizing them, as thinking they are morally deficient by the logic of the closing of the DPM. Third, and most importantly, this policy destroys feminism. There is a massive, massive image bomb to the feminist movement almost everywhere in the world. Like, even in the US, the UK, it is perceived as being extreme, let alone like, in the plurality of states in the Middle East, the African continent, the developing world, Saudi Arabia, for example. 3 reasons this makes the feminist movement much harder to get changes that women actually want. 1, it alienates women from the feminist movement. I've already given you in my second arguments about like why most women will be alienated, but I think specifically conservative women or religious women, women who genuinely believe in filial piety, i.e. billions of people on planet Earth, believe it is kind of their role to raise children. And like, yes, that might have been foisted on them by the patriarchy, but if someone genuinely believes that to be true, and the feminist movement says, we stand against that, that is the point at which women do not associate with feminism. Second of all, I think men are much, much less likely to support the feminist movement. Generally, it's gaining pretty like serious amounts of traction. Things like the Me Too movement that like seem to have generically intuitive appeal, right? That like we should sexually harass women. The point at which you make becoming a feminist or supporting feminism as a man a choice between whether you should have a son or not. That is the point at which the overwhelming majority of men, let alone conservative men, are less likely to support the feminist movement. Third, this is a massive use of political capital. It's a massive use of like the everyday feminist project's airtime, but it has to spend that airtime telling women not to have children rather than campaigning for issues that genuinely impact women. What are the issues that genuinely impact women that the feminist movement should actually be catering to? Things like the Me Too movement and sexual assault that I think both men and women can agree is more impactful and will actually improve the lives of a majority of women. Things like in Saudi Arabia, for example, the massive traction that's been made in the last 2 years with things like marital rape being criminalised, with things like women no longer being deemed property, with things like them being allowed to drive. This only happens when the feminist movement picks clear things that it cares about, and specifically, if the things that it cares about are actually important to women on the ground. Because if you don't have women showing up to your rallies because you said that they choose to have a kid, they're an evil human being, like you cannot gain traction. That's the point at which the feminist movement is perceived as extreme, when men can say, look, even women do not support this movement. I think there are a host of more important things for women's rights than childbirth. Specifically, this policy strips women that choose to have children of the care they need, the care that they are principally entitled to, but most importantly, it bankrupts the feminist movement, it makes it extreme, it makes it unable to get genuine change on sexual harassment, on equal pay, on not viewing women as property. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you to the member of opposition. We call on Governor Wade to continue.
I'm first going to start by rebutting that extension, and the reasons that it is wrong are fivefold. Firstly, this is not the feminist movement doing this, it is the government doing this. And the feminist movement is likely to be far more popular when it has government ads that are well made backing it up on its side, when its messages are publicised on TV and in schools, and when doctors are explaining them to people in patient rooms rather than just by crazy feminists on the street, as you would have them say. Secondly, the reason the feminist movement isn't believed is because men buy into the false ideas of opposition side. For example, they think that there are no real harms to motherhood and that women are complaining about nothing. They do not understand the burdens of motherhood. They think that like labour of childhood is split 50-50 these days. If only statistics were publicised that women still do 80% of their household work, even in the developed world, feminism would have far more supporters. Lastly, it is a totally fake argument that the feminist movement should not do anything because there's worse things happening in Saudi Arabia. Fourthly, we think that feminists are, to the extent, are able to do this in a way without shame, and both of these sides' arguments are premised on the idea that this has to be done through the mechanism of shame, a mechanism that neither Gov team supported, and they have refused to take us at their best. For example, they could just be commiserating with women about the hardships of motherhood. We've explained why this would make motherhood better. It could be publicising statistics about the hardships of motherhood. It could be publicising ads about women supporting each other, saying, hey, honey, I know it sucks, but we can still be friends, and you don't have to focus on that kid all the time. Lastly, women don't turn up to mystical feminist meetings to hang out with other women. They hang out with their female friends who would be better off under this side and under our side of the house, more likely to ask them about themselves and how they are going than their child, more likely to ask them about problems that they are more aware about than ever before. It's not like they stop turning up to their mystical feminist meeting. You still go out to brunch, you still go out to the park with your kids, and at those interactions with other women, they are likely to be more positive and supportive rather than having shame associated with bringing up the fact that sometimes you feel alienated from your own child and sometimes your nipples hurt. Next, we don't think it matters if the feminist movement has fewer supporters when we have solved a huge problem in feminism. And if you believe other arguments from our side, which is that motherhood is bad and fewer people will have kids because we proved that the policy was effective, then bugger it. Lastly, we think, and so that's why it's clear, we think that this makes the feminist movement more effective, but also this is the state doing this action, and the state has an obligation to support the feminist movement in doing this action. No. Secondly, why does this make motherhood better? And this is where side government gets to have their cake and eat it too. Because even if this policy is ineffective as they claim, we still, because women still have children, we prove why this norm makes it better. What have they given us to this? Firstly, they said, we would lose child support and you would lose the benefits of having a child like welfare, which we explicitly said you would not do because the two people still get welfare. So, but what we would remove is what they explicitly said was compensation for women's labour going into actual slavery for a year, was his words. That we think is a good thing to do, to take away the idea that, for example, that you could get a bonus, $1,000 for every kid that you have, because that is putting women's bodies into the labour of the state, which we think is wrong, coercive and sexist. So, how does it make motherhood better? Thomas gives you 5 main ways. And they give you a really vague response from OO. They're like, we will make motherhood better by being vaguely empowering or by maybe having more mothers. But we think that it is much easier to do that when you can discuss these problems and when you see the clear risks of motherhood. Firstly, the harms are far more visible. When you are publicising the detriments of motherhood, which is the case of the government team, they are more able to be discussed, they are more publicised, and they are more easily fixed. Secondly, fathers are more active. When it is seen that women are not the ones that are likely to love motherhood, then it is clear that that child should be raised by 2 people, because one of them is sometimes going to be tired, and because she wouldn't have gone into it just for her own joy of motherhood, of which she has no part. It is something that they endeavoured on together because there is no mystical child-mother bond that this OO thought existed. Thirdly, there's this norm that it is not that fun to do, and so therefore those norms that pressure women into motherhood have decreased. And lastly, they claim that it's just factually incorrect that people focus far more on the baby than they do on the mother. In the moments after childbirth and for the rest of your life, people ask you how your kid is doing. They ask you how much it freaking weighed. They ask you if it's a boy or a girl, but they do not ask you if you need any help or if you suffered any. You might have gone through a major surgery in a cesarean section, and they care more about the penis of your child. And that's why it's clear this focuses back on the mother in a huge imbalance where a woman has to give up lots of her autonomy about herself at the moment that she has a baby and stops being a person and starts being a mother. By taking away that idea that is a primary form of women's identity, it makes it better for her because she can be seen as not just a mother, or as mother being something that she really wanted to do, but a choice that she had to weigh against pros and cons, and some of the cons were maybe she wouldn't get to spend as much time with her friends. I'm going to take... Well, no, that you never want to give us one. Okay, yes.
It's worth noting that your policy gets the most impact in contexts where there are fewer pressures on women to have children. Why do you still support this policy when there are contexts with no pressures on women to have children?
I don't believe there are contexts where there are no pressures to have children, because I think sexism is incredibly pervasive, and to the extent that there are no pressures to have children in some areas, it is because the harms of motherhood have been more publicised than in others, which I think is at least somewhat in line and parallel with our policy. We would rather echo that out across the world. Thirdly, why is this policy effective? And this is again why we get ahead, because if you believe that motherhood is bad, we have been the team that shows you how we will fix it, which is how we've also come up over the opening half. We think there's a few ways. Firstly, we think it empowers women to discuss things. So they've talked about the power of the Me Too movement, but it's only when women start to talk about and for men too to consider this as not something that is guaranteed that their wife will sign up to. But the idea that this would just be replaced with more sexism or just not a free choice is not factually correct. Sexism doesn't just come and go. It's not like tomorrow we could have the oppressive norm that women have no emotions or the oppressive norm that women hate children. Sexism doesn't change that way. This has been an oppressive norm for centuries, one that we should come back against. We make motherhood better, we make people more free, and the feminist movement will be just fine.
Thank you to the government work, we call it on the opposition work.
The first thing I want to deal with at the top of my speech is the claim that we get going down the government bench. They don't actually have to shame women on their side of the house or force them to not have kids. They're simply allowing them to have a discussion or to make a more free choice. Why can't they push that on you in terms of making a decision panel? Two reasons. Firstly, the mechanism. What we hear from the government whip is, we're still giving them some support. They still have welfare, not cutting their ability to have kids. Their mechanism is also getting rid of things like subsidized daycare, tax breaks for females with young children, who now find it more expensive to buy food for their kids or to pay for transportation, subsidized prenatal treatment. This is effectively making it far more expensive for people to have kids. But two, the point at which they run argumentation about how it's so coercive right now for women to have children, the norms are so strong, they can't also tell you that they're not going to scare women or shame them from having kids. Because the fact is, most women already know right now that there are problems with pregnancy, that they could get sick or that it's expensive. They don't have to tell them what those problems are. They have to tell them that if they choose to become pregnant, that's a bad choice. They will be shamed or scare them from making that choice. Don't let them push this choice, the comparative on you, that they're just helping women make a decision. They're telling them don't have kids. That's a bad call. Two, I want to point out that the government whip drops huge portions of our case that we get from opposing opposition. They only rebut the third extension that we give you, which is about the developing world, these sorts of the impact of the feminist movement in religious communities. I'll talk about that later though. But what do they ignore? They drop. One, this makes women poorer who cannot choose to have kids anymore because it becomes more expensive. Two, they are tied down to abusive partners or even just men in relationships that they're not happy with because they don't get benefits from the government in terms of raising the kid that they're inevitably likely to have. Three, families, couples have less choice because they're being forced to choose between economic sustainability and having a kid. The second portion of our extension was in direct refutation to their material when we tell you that women don't go to their friends, they don't go to female support groups. When they tell you that there's a lack of discussion between women about the horrors of pregnancy, which I can test are that bad, but for women they can be horrible. We tell you that they're less likely to go to those support groups because they're afraid of being shamed and scared. No response. The only team that is giving consistent material about how women are harmed because men and women are still going to choose to have kids and that becomes much, much harder for them to live unresponded to. Okay, given that context and this piece of reputation, two things I want to look at. Choice, female empowerment. Looking firstly at choice. The major argument we get going up and down the government bench is that women are coerced into having kids due to social norms and government policy. Okay, firstly, we contest that this is the only norm in society, that the only norm that women are being told now is have kids. How do I know that this is true? Because the rates of abortion are going up, the rates of contraception usage are going up. There's a stagnation in the rate of population growth in most parts of the world, even in Africa, China, India, all of those places. More women are entering the workforce, more women are joining universities. The fact that we have Sheryl Sandberg publishing a book saying you can both have a career and have kids. The fact that women like Amal Clooney say, I don't want to have kids. The fact that Angelina Jolie says, I had a traumatic pregnancy experience, my mother did as well, so I'm just not going to have kids, I'm going to adopt as a replacement. There's a huge push by the feminist movement in the status quo to say, you can have a career and have kids, and if you don't want kids, it's a choice that you can make as well. The key argumentation that you get from Ed, though, is that current countervailing norm that exists in the status quo that women don't have to have kids gets weaker under the world of proposition.
reason why it gets weaker is because the feminist movement itself is actively pushing women against the norm that it's currently pushing. To say that it's not a choice that you can make, but the right choice is to not have kids at all, which isn't a realistic choice for men and women around the world. Two, though, note that this policy is equally coercive. If their problem is one of principle, which is to say that women shouldn't be forced into a choice, they're also forcing them into making a choice. That choice, though, is one of not having kids. And they can't say that they're not forcing them for the reasons that I give you in my introduction. Given that both sides of the house are equally coercive per se, the question you need to decide on is about quality of outcome. Because something being coercive isn't that bad. Lots of things in life are coercive. The fact that poor people have to work dangerous jobs is coercive, but many of them do it. The fact that many people are born into not desirable situations and they have to get out of them is coercive. The question that matters most is what is the best quality of outcome for women. And what Ed tells you is that the people who are going to have kids under both sides of the house because of economic reasons, because of social and pressure-based reasons, are going to be left behind. And the people who choose not to have kids are going to feel a lot worse because a lot of people just like being mothers for the reasons that they give you. I want to note that the response that we get from the government whip to this material is, people aren't going to feel that coerced on their side of the house because they actually feel like to an extent the feminist movement is on their side. Because this isn't the government doing it, it's the feminist movement making those stances. So what Ed tells you in response to this and what remains unresponded to is it's not about whether or not people buy into the feminist movement or buy into what the government tells them. It's the fact that many men and women just want families. Whether or not it's coercive, the fact is people want it. So when a movement tells you that what you want is wrong, you're less likely to support that movement and to feel like they're imposing a choice on you. And the consequence of that is you're likely to see people pushing back against that repression, pushing back against that movement. So even if I can see that there are some societies in which women are pressured to have kids, particularly insular religious communities, conservative communities, those are exactly the sorts of communities where we need to feel like the state and the feminist movement is on their side and is liberalizing and is giving them more choice rather than less choice. On choice, we say that it isn't nearly as coercive and status quo as they'd like to have you believe, but more importantly, we make it far more coercive for women who either are going to have kids under both sides of the house and now have a worse quality of life and are poor, or have to choose between their family and economic sustainability. Yeah?
Ironically, our team seems to think that feminist movement and governments will be less totally successful than your team does. All we envision is a world in which there are multiple competing narratives to have or not have children.
Yeah, so
so
this is actually very similar to the extension that we get from back half, which is like you have more discussion. A few impacts to this. I told you in my introduction that you don't just have discussion through coercing people into making a choice because it's harder for women to have kids. Two, if it's so true that pregnancy is so problematic, financially, emotionally, socially, psychologically, for all the reasons they give you, I just find it so hard to believe that couples in the status quo don't have discussions before they have kids. I think most people talk about, do we want to have kids when we're older? But even if you believe that more people have discussions about what it means to be pregnant, does that impact really matter to you, panel? Does it really matter that a man and a woman sit down at their kitchen table and say, do we want to have kids? When they're being forced into not having kids when otherwise they would like to because of the economic disincentive, or when they say, we're going to have kids regardless because we think we need more farm workers, but the difference is we don't get subsidized daycare. That is the true impact of this round. Look, OO talks about increased development. Great, credit them with that. OG talks about birth being coercive and bad. What we tell you is people are going to have some kids regardless on both sides of the house. We would rather make it a better quality of life for those people and not make them choose between their economic sustainability and having a family. Proud to oppose.